Hello. My talk today is it's about reading the digital tea leaves. It's my interpretation about what's going on at the moment and where that might lead. And we know that there's plenty of interpreters and plenty of things happening out there and many different futures that could actually happen and not just one. So when I look at it and when I interpret it, then I'm doing it from my perspective, my experience, the people that I know, the clients that I've worked for and all of that kind of stuff. So I'd like to explain a little bit today what I see and read into the digital tea leaves from my personal perspective, but also a hope that digital integrates into our physical life more than it has at the moment. So the title, From Analog to Digital and Back Again, is not suggesting that we're going to somehow reverse out of digital technology. In fact, it's going to go quite the reverse. We're going to get much, much more of it. But it is that when we understand and use digital technology, the way in which we understand it is primarily ourselves, our friends, our physical environment, our home, etc. So hopefully I can kind of unpack that. But to do so, I need to kind of explain a little bit about myself. This is where I live. It's a small holding in Devon. So for those of you who are not from the UK, then Devon is like about 60 or 70 miles in that direction. It's a county in the southwest of England. It's got a lovely coastline on the north and a nice, gentle kind of coastline on the south. And in the UK, at least, lots of families come down to Devon to go on holiday, etc. You know, and that's fine. I mean, it gets kind of crowded, but the worst of it is that when you go to London or go somewhere else and you meet the families of, you know, the parents or whatever, and, oh, I had such a lovely time in Devon. It's so warm down there. And it kind of begins to wear you out, because the truth of it is that when they're not there, this is Devon. Yes. And the thing is that by kind of like freezing Devon like this, it kind of suits us both in a way, because like it kind of stays all that quaint, nice, untouched sort of thing. And the Devon people, like, they haven't changed that much in a long period of time. Certainly not where I live. They're very grounded, and their families have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is my house. It was built in the 1500s. It's hard to kind of describe, but it's got so many little nooks and crannies where people have lit the candles and damaged this, and you know, the beams are from an old ship that predated it, their house, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a small holding. It's got 35 acres, and we grow vegetables there. We're reasonably self-sufficient. We have animals, we have sometimes pigs and ducks, we all the time have sheep and all of that kind of stuff. So that's my route, you know, that's my lifestyle. That's kind of, for 21 years now, been, in a way, the start point. But at the same time, throughout that 21 years, starting in 1993, I've been working in digital media. And it all started out with a kind of fire, a kind of really almost compelling need to know what the web was going to be about at that time, as it was going to be about interactive television, CD-ROM, all of these things. And in 1994, we started a company which turned out to be quite well. It did quite well. In the UK, it was known as Razorfish. Well, around the world, it was known as Razorfish. I was the MD. You know, I was the boss, if you like, of the UK office. It was like more than 300 people, so it did okay. Now, part of a company called Fjord. We started this company in 2001. There's quite a lot of people, there's quite a lot of offices, and we're doing okay. So I'm like one of the directors, founders, and all of that kind of stuff. And we kind of design digital services, which is like a core function of what digital media is all about, service delivery. And we design how those work for some quite kind of big clients. And I kind of sometimes step back and I think, what? And part of it is that I am not a designer. I have no skill in interaction design or visual design, the kind of design skills that we apply in the office. I'm not a technologist. In fact, I am incompetent at technology. And when I see the contrast between like my home and the sheep and the vegetables and the cabbages, and like it's recently, in a way, and somebody said about like age and stuff like that, giving you understanding about yourself and all of that. that I've realised what it is. So I'd just like to kind of try and explain. So these are my sheep, and they help a lot. Now, when you look at them, you might actually think I'm asking them a question, like, how did all of that happen? But actually, I'm probably just getting a hurdle or something, and they're just like whinging away at me, like, you know, what's that idiot doing in the shed again, and all of that kind of stuff. But the main thing is that I'm like doing stuff in and around sheep, or in and around the garden, or the hedge, or the fencing, or house, something. And it's all really quite kind of basic. It's all quite rooted. It's not really anything at all to do with digital media. It's got a different connection. And for me, anyway, it kind of gives me a grounding. It's like a kind of port, an anchor, a root, you might say. And you're doing this stuff, and you're not really thinking on the conscious. You're thinking subconsciously about what's happening in digital media. Of course, you're bashing in a fence post for the 50th time that day, and you're knackered and all that. And you're doing all of that, but you're still thinking about digital media, and it's still providing you with a context. And this kind of gets quite extreme. You know, in lambing, you probably know, it kind of, at any point in the night, not during the day, you get lambs, and at 3 in the morning, you know, you can be there, and it's like really cold, and it's a really problematic birth, and, you know, you're up there to your elbow, and it kind of comes out, and you have to go to work, because, like, Devon's 200 miles from London, so, you know, the lamb comes out, and you have a cup of tea, and then you get washed, and you put on your clothes and get the train to London. And you go into London, and you go into the office, maybe a client meeting, and you can still, like, smell. And I think that's context, if you like. So the other thing that is kind of worth knowing is that prior to doing this smallholding thing, then I was working in an ad agency, looking at media, and I really got into the media. And like Wilson the other day, I read and read and read about this man, Marshall McLuhan, because he's like this kind of errant genius who kind of wanders everywhere, but somewhere in there is a really interesting message, and I search time and time again for these interesting messages. So what he has done is to help me to understand that every medium has a meaning, it has a kind of message, and in a way, just because I'm an idiot with technology, it doesn't matter if I can get beyond the technology to understand the meaning in the medium. So what it does then, when you have context time, and you have some level of interest in Marshall McLuhan and media, you kind of get to understand what the meaning is of the medium. And it's really important, because when you go into the office, then the medium, the meaning and the doing, they kind of complement each other, you know. They give each other kind of vitality. So the meaning, when you're designing a digital service, means that you've really identified the core need, the core benefit that you can deliver, the proposition, as we say, the concept. It kind of gives it a driving force. And when you have that meaning, the doing becomes all aligned. It becomes like, I don't know, it just kind of fizzes along. And when you don't have it, it just kind of just dissipates. So I think I was contributing meaning into the office. Of course, lots of other people did too, but my particular contribution was like that. So that's why I think I kind of, you know, managed to stay the course with these companies. And this kind of duality, this kind of balance between meaning and doing, and making sure that the dynamic between them is good, is, I think, really, really important. And lots of people live in the city and go to the country to get the same thing. I mean, I used to live in London and go up to Scotland or the Lake District or wherever to do it. Lots of people do. And in a way, when you're out on the moor or whatever, you're doing exactly the same thing as I'm doing if I'm mending a fence or something. So there's a kind of balance to be found, and we all, you know, go out there finding it, searching for it, etc., etc. But there is in Western society, and digital in particular, a little bit of a leaning, a little bit of a tendency towards doing. You see it a lot, and so sometimes we have to deliberately put more emphasis on the meaning just to get that balance right. But it is in the nature of things to get the balance right. You know, so we heard this morning from Will about doing and not doing. That's a balance. But yin and yang, that's a balance. You know, that the Tai Chi thing of pulling energy up from the earth and pushing it out, that's a balance. You know, day and night, breathing in and out, that's a balance. Hot and cold. You know, seeing the sea in the tide in and seeing the sea and the tide out. That's somewhere a balance. Seeing, the countryside in the spring, that's somewhere. So we know that it's like universal. It's like kind of how it is, like gravity how it is, that a balance exists in the world and that there must be some way that we can kind of tune into that balance. And maybe some way I've tuned into that balance, maybe a little bit on the opposite edges, but tuned into a balance between digital and a working life and a small holding. Funnily enough, in the early days of the web, that balance existed really quite overtly. It existed in the chat rooms, but it also existed in the first big websites that came out. And this was an early edition of Amazon, and you can just tell the love and meaning and care that is embedded in the site, right? It's a retailer, and anybody who's worked with retailers knows that they're pretty full on when it comes to doing. But they found some level of meaning here. These are the books that we love. And then it talks about the editing process and the recommendations process. And I think back then when we first started designing for digital, then that kind of pervaded, that balance pervaded, but somehow the doing built up energy. It kind of got, I don't know, it got heated up. And as we all know, there was a kind of crash. So this is the Nasdaq over a period of time. And that crash was like too much doing, just not enough balance. Companies who had come to the medium wanting to do because what they saw was gold, but not understanding the meaning, not even in themselves, let alone the medium itself. And so we crashed. And you can see that since then, it kind of went quite far down. But it is quite interesting what's happened between those two, between the left-hand side of the peak and the right-hand side of the peak. So on the left-hand side of the peak, the predominant kind of situation was that the web, the digital kind of whatever doing was something that you went to do. You went maybe to your study or your bedroom somewhere, the office or whatever, and you went to a plugged-in computer that was plugged in by Ethernet or ISDN or whatever, and you switched it on and you plugged into the network, and then you plugged into a Netscape or whatever, and then to a mothership of a website, so you went somewhere. They used to call them destinations, these big, huge things that defined what the internet was about at the time. But after the peak, and in fact starting even during the peak or just before it, things were changing. The computer was getting unplugged. We were getting 3G. We were getting different handsets for mobiles. There's suddenly a loosening up. There's something called Web 2.0. We all know about it. It's a loosening up of the condition that people had in order to, if you like, distribute web solutions more effectively. So Wi-Fi, all of those kind of things began to define a new generation of stuff. That kind of started, it wasn't kind of, not a victim of it, wasn't kind of involved in the peak, but it kind of started at that time. But after the peak, it started to come to the fore. And we began to get loads of stuff, loads of things like we use just like normal, like Skype or iTunes or whatever, started up in the kind of period. So if Will was here, he'd probably say in the yin period, it was all loads of yang, that kind of, all of that energy and push and all of that kind of stuff that got us into that boom in the first place. And then we went through a yin period afterwards. And in that yin period, there's lots of meaning and lots of things were created that we now take for granted and use a lot. So it's interesting. I mean, from our perspective, then we've learned a lot. I mean, we've been like designing stuff all the way through this. Now we're designing for even more devices, particularly for tablet devices. And it's taking on a new kind of, not a new context, because we always had this, but if you like, we're understanding how to design better. We design for of course. Lots of people design for of course. We all know when somebody comes to a digital service of some description that you need a hook, we call that aha. It's a kind of aha. So, that moment of connection with the digital service, you need to know what that connection is going to be and how to tune into it. And then there's a kind of possibility that you can really kind of, have that, one-night stand, that one-band, thank you, band sort of one-night stand, which is like, wow, but then after you kind of maybe change your mind or whatever. But if you kind of get into that relationship with somebody who, you just feel like more natural, and that person might be a long-term relationship because it's kind of an of-course relationship. So we've learned through the last few years that of-course relationships are effectively the foundation for digital design. But still, you know, going back to this graph, it's a bit of an issue because when you read the tea leaves, and different people will say different things, but there's a possibility that that whole thing is heating up. There's a possibility because more and more people are entering the marketplace with innovative ideas and stuff. There's more money that are being paid and everything like that. So in this kind of heated up situation, we're also seeing that people are, maybe as individuals, suffering a little bit. You know, we hear of addictions, we hear of people who are suffering depression because of digital. Is that a sign of like a lack of balance? Are we in some way over the next 2 or 3 years going to feel a bit of a crunch like we did in 2001? And are we also sensing another phase coming through? Just like the crunch that happened at the end of the 90s, when a new phase, this kind of free phase, this kind of liberated phase was coming through, is another one coming through? Well, I personally believe it is. And I personally believe that this time the phase is what you might say embedded in the environment. So whereas the first phase was about you go to somewhere, and then the second phase was you liberated from that and it's all about mobility and individuality and identity, the third phase could be, and I hope it is, much more about me, here, and now. It's about the meaning of this time and of me in this place. So it's not like this doesn't happen already. Lots of people use sat-nav. So that's what it's all about, right? And it's kind of provided us with a very useful digital service, but not one that we have to go and plug in, and not one that feels as though it's kind of any time, anywhere. Actually, it's specific to here, right now. And of course, it's quite specific, because as we all know, and it kind of points out the speed cameras coming down the road, et cetera, so it's very useful. This picture is of the Amazon. In the Amazon, there's a tribe called the Kofan that I've stayed with a few times. Now this is a group of people who live at least 150 kilometers from the nearest electricity supply. They're completely self-sufficient, and they use GPS, so they have handsets. They use the GPS, only the GPS, to navigate the Amazon River because it keeps them up to date with the sandbanks. They actually monitor their own jaguar and other animals by GPS, and they map those out so that they can demonstrate the kind of efficacy, if you like, of their environment. So they're using it, and they've been using it for 3 years. And there's this whole thing going on at the moment about wearables. So these things, you probably know whether it's something to do with your heartbeat or to do with your blood pressure or to do with your temperature, your food, this, that, and the other. We're now wearing stuff that tells us about us here and now. It's very, very interesting that these things have become like fashion accessories, and they're introducing us to a new level, a new type of digital connection. There's a service called Zeo, which measures your brain patterns, and these brain patterns tell Zeo what your sleep is like. And I understand, although, somebody's told me so, but I believe this is true, that athletes are using this so that they can understand their own sleep patterns and then get them adjusted in order to optimize their performance during the day. How do they do that? They look at their readings for their sleep patterns and they match them up against either an ideal or an average. So it's kind of getting there. And it's quite interesting that this here and now, or me here and now, this new phase, has got this kind of wellness label because we're bothered about that, right? Maybe the environment isn't quite so bothering. 1/3 of Londoners do not walk on a natural surface in a year. Their connection with the environment isn't that strong. The connection with themselves, what they wear, their fitness and all of that, that is strong. And even more, because we've got an ageing population, so surely the government's interested. We've got a kind of obese population, and all of these other things. So maybe this kind of new phase of here and now is going to be driven by this wellness service delivery. But it goes way beyond that, way beyond that. There are so many chips out there already, and so many more that will be out there in the near future. Tim O'Reilly says this is the Web 3.0. This kind of network, this kind of infrastructure, this kind of infiltration of digital embedded in the environment. There is already some evidence of what that might mean. So we've got smart metering in homes. We can see who is in the home. We can see what appliances are on the home. We can see whether or not our energy consumption is comparable with a good energy consumption, let's call it sustainable, or green energy consumption, and other things that we can do to improve it. So in smart homes, we're already beginning to apply this network of sensors. So this definition then, this third phase, defined by me here and now, my fingerprint, has kind of got a network of information which it generates, but it's closed. So I've drawn a thing about it. It's not always closed. There's things like patients like me, which kind of aggregate other people's fingerprint. So what that means is that my fingerprint can be compared with somebody else's fingerprint, which is really, really nice. But actually, if it's not just about me and my health, and not just about my car, and not just about my home, but all of our cars and all of our homes and all of the interdependencies and how they can work more effectively together for the environment, then it's about this. And how do we deal with that? How do we manage a network of sensors? So we get the sensor on the left-hand side. That's there, and it's happening. It's already happening more and more. And we've got activities, remember? That kind of meaning doing. So we've got the doing on the right-hand side. There are plenty of people generating doing, but who is making some sort of meaning in the middle? And who is going to pay for making meaning in the middle? It's not meaning just for one thing, it's meaning for everything, the interdependence of everything. How does that work? So I actually don't have questions. When that lady from Cardigan was on the other day, I thought, actually, I bet she could make it work. So is that it? You know, this kind of operating system, are we the operating system for, you know, the sensors? I don't know. Or do we need some sort of web of context, a kind of yin web to the activity web? Is that what we need? So it's up to us how we build the future. It shouldn't just happen. Not when we are faced with all the crises around the world, not when we're faced with environmental problems, social problems, political problems, leaders who don't know how to deal with these things. We shouldn't just let it happen. There must be some way. And I'm suggesting that maybe this contextual web, this meaning, might be something that we could do. I don't know how. My sheep do. My sheep do, because after the crisis for foot and mouth, they asked for these electronic ear tags to be put in. So now they're all registered on the network. They're all network sheep. And the good thing for them is that they are traced. So if ever they get sold or moved or whatever, then that means that we know. So if we ever get foot and mouth again, and we are faced with the disaster like we were last time, which is, let's just kill them all, it won't happen to my sheep, because the sensor will say, but they've not been near any other sheep which have got this foot and mouth. You can save my sheep, just leave them alone. So I think they're fairly smart. Thank you.